The Apostle Paul is writing a letter to the Ephesian Christians, and he's writing this letter from a Roman prison. Previously, he had spent several years with the Ephesians, preaching the gospel of Jesus to them, encouraging them in the faith. And now he writes that they may deepen their commitment to Christ. They may more fully understand all that God has done for them in Jesus. In the first 3 chapters, Paul paints this majestic picture of what the gospel is. And then in chapters 4 through 6, he shows us what it looks like to live a gospel-centered life. And you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived, in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature the children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness toward us in Christ Jesus. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. A few years ago, I received an unexpected call from a friend who I'd lost touch with over the years. We first met at a church that we both attended, and I went to lunch and had coffee with him a few times. What really struck me about this guy was he was a type A, get it done type of guy. He had great ambitions and dreams, passion for his life, and he would always talk about what he was going to do and who he was going to become, and like his goals and objectives for success. And it was just, it was a lot of fun being around him, quite honestly, and kind of listening to all his passion. Well, a few years had gone by. He moved away from the area, and we kind of lost touch with each other. And so one afternoon, I got this call, and it was him. And I could tell right away, the sound of his voice, something was wrong. After just saying, hi, and it's nice to hear from you, he invited me to lunch, and we set up a time where we could meet. As I walked into the restaurant, I noticed he was sitting in the back, and I took one look at him, and I knew something was really wrong. I mean, just the look on his face. He really didn't look like the guy I remembered. I walked over to the table, I sat down, shook his hand. We exchanged a couple of pleasantries, how you doing, how's things, and we ordered our food. And he proceeded then to tell me what had gone on in his life over the last several years. He was at a place where he felt completely lost. He had become so driven in his life by his passions, by his feelings, by his goals, his thoughts, what he wanted, that now he sat there at that table confessing to me that he had lost just about everything. He found himself addicted to pornography. His marriage was in shambles. His wife wanted to leave him. His kids didn't want to talk to him. Even in his business, in his job, he had made some significant unethical decisions, and it had cost him dearly. And he's telling the story, he's just in tears beside himself, not knowing where to go. So with all of the hope and aspiration and ambition that he had, it brought him to this very lonely, very dark place. As I recount that story, meeting my friend for lunch that day, I'm reminded of Ephesians chapter 2. Here, in verses 1 through 10, Paul does a couple of things. He writes to remind the Gentile Christians of their former way of life, how they were driven by lusts and passions, driven to fulfill the desires of their heart, whatever it is that they felt they did. And Paul writes and reminds them that life left them dead inside. Listen to the opening words of chapter 2. And you were dead in the trespasses and sins, in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind. That's what it means to be driven by our passions, desires, goals. When we seek to fulfill what we want, and that is the singular pursuit of our life, what ends up happening is, while we may be very busy and very preoccupied with all kinds of things, we end up being dead inside, dead in sin. So Paul reminds the Gentile Christians in Ephesus, this is the life you used to live. This life driven by selfishness and sin. Then he goes on to reaffirm the great grace we have in Jesus Christ. In verse 4, one of my favorite phrases in the Bible, but God, being rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved. You see, in Jesus Christ, God offers us a new life, not one that ends in darkness and death and disillusionment and discouragement, but one that is full of joy and peace, grace and mercy, all made possible because of what Jesus Christ has done for us. This is God's great gift of salvation, that God did not leave us to ourselves, did not leave us in the state of self-centeredness and sinfulness, but came down, entered humanity as one of us, died on a cross, and was risen from the dead so that we might have new life. Just the same way Christ was made alive on the third day, we can be made alive by faith in him. So how do we access or embrace this new life that God offers us in Jesus Christ? Paul makes it clear that you don't access by working harder. You don't get this new life that God offers us by trying to earn it, by being just more driven. In fact, it's the opposite. It's surrendering. It's by grace through faith. And that's what he focuses on, verses 8 through 10. How do we attain the new life of God in Jesus Christ? He says it like this, verse 8, for by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. This new life that God offers us in Jesus Christ is the gift of salvation. God so loved you and me that he didn't leave us to ourselves. He didn't leave us in this state of self-absorption, self-conceitedness, the state of sin. He came as one of us in the person of Jesus Christ, died on a cross to pay for the penalty of our sin, and rose on the third day. And just like Christ rose on the third day and had new life, we now can have new life in Jesus Christ. And it's not by working harder. That's not how you get it. It's not by trying to earn it. It's simply surrendering to God's grace and love and mercy in Jesus Christ. The Christian life, being a follower of Christ, is not about working harder. It's about surrendering yourself to him. that in turn, He might grant you and me a new life. So in the end, God has not created you or I to be driven by selfish pursuits, obsessions to fulfill our self-indulgence. I want you to think about something, especially if you have experienced success, if you've achieved great things in your life, if you've got a great career, if you've made a lot of money. You see, while all those things in and of themselves are good, without God, they are empty. So I want you to think about this. Are you driven? Are you driven by your own passions and pursuits and desires to the point where you are very busy and your life is filled with all kinds of stuff, but you're dead inside? You see, that's what it means to be driven. That's exactly what Paul is trying to reaffirm for the Ephesian believers. That was the life that they had. They were driven. But now God offers them a new way of life. He offers Himself in this new life in the person of Jesus Christ. It's only by embracing Jesus Christ that we can have access to the life that God has offered and always intended for us to have. A life that calls us to surrender to His grace and His love. A life that is filled with His joy and His peace. That's my prayer for you.